Hello and welcome back to Perspectives, bringing you our daily dose of news and views covering the topics we hope are relevant to you. Well, today we look at the latest evidence of the RSS BJP's favourite tactic of intimidating and indeed even imprisoning its political opposition in India's so-called democracy. Trump dodges yet another bullet, and the shocking story of the elderly Sikh unwillingly shaved in hospital. And we'll have a latest update on Jaggi. Well, joining me as always for Perspectives is our very own correspondent in Canada, James Cousineau. Good morning, James.
Good morning, Angus, and I hope all of our viewers had an amazing weekend. Thanks for all of the posts out there. We love hearing where you're from, and boy, it's surprising how far and wide around the world our message is going. Thanks for doing that.
Indeed, and together James and I will be bringing you our perspectives on the daily news affecting the Sikh community across the world. And of course, as usual, we will be taking a look at lots of your great comments which have been filling up below the videos, so thank you as always for those. Right, James, let's get the show on road. What are you going to start us off with today?
Well, it seems that Donald Trump has once again dodged a bullet, and this time it was in Florida as he was playing a round of golf. And this happened about 30 minutes or 20, 30 minutes away from his home at Mar-a-Lago. And this has been a very interesting one because when the media got a hold of it, they have spoken to this individual's, to the accused person's father, who says that it's totally out of character and very odd for his son, the son that he knows. He doesn't, believe that his son is capable of such violence. And yet, if you look at the reports, if they are accurate, this individual has a history of violence, of resisting arrest, of motor vehicle infractions, just a whole slew. So let's just backtrack a bit and let's take a look at what actually happened. Now, it appears that Donald Trump was out on his golf course at Trump International, and they were playing the fifth hole. As they were heading towards the green to putt, the Secret Service generally goes one hole ahead of the president to ensure that they are still in a safe zone and to monitor for anything. The individual was hiding in the bushes and the trees there, and a Secret Service officer was very astute and aware and noticed actually the muzzle of an AK-47 sticking out of the bushes. At that time, they did confront the individual, and shots were fired by the Secret Service. There were about 5 or 6 rounds fired. The individual took off, and he did get away to a point where he made it onto the freeway. Unfortunately, one of the bystanders was able to get a picture of the fleeing vehicle, and that included the plate number. Officers then found the individual on the interstate. They did go ahead with a pursuit and apprehended the individual and took him into custody. He is expected to appear in court in Florida within the next 24 hours. They assume later today, but again, it could be just a preliminary appearance where the press and the media may not get a lot of information at that point. So we'll have to wait and see how this plays out. Now, as we know, that this is not the first attempt on President Trump. This has been the second one that we're aware of. We don't know how many other threats or viable threats there have been out there. But it's very important to understand that the way that the politics work and democracy works is not to assassinate or to go after political leaders and rivals. It is to go to the polls. Make your disdain known at the ballot box. Whether you want to support Trump or Harris is completely up to you. And that's what's beautiful about a democracy, is when you can have your voice heard at the polling stations, not through acts of violence. Regardless as to how you may feel about an individual that's running for office, whether it's at a city, state, or federal level, it's never the place to be involved in such an act of cowardice and violence against that individual. And it also has far-reaching implications and impacts on family members that just are innocent bystanders in all of the political mess that comes with being a politician. With that said, of course, we have to take a look at also the situation around mental health resources and mental health initiatives. Now, we know that in the States, in Canada, and other parts of the world, budgets have been cut for many decades when it comes to mental health resources. And only recently have we seen an increase starting to happen and a very serious stance taken about mental health issues not being properly addressed. A lot of times, the mental health issues are actually just ignored, and they lock people in prisons where they are not receiving mental health supports or getting any better. So again, this seems to be someone that had some type of instability because they've pulled up on his social media accounts. And we are assuming at this point that the media have the correct person on these social media accounts that also promote things such as a biological attack by China when it comes to the recent pandemic of a few years back. And also this individual trying to recruit Afghans who are shed away or threatened by the Taliban, to recruit them to go and support Ukraine to fight off Russians in that war as well. So this, to me, although his father says it's very out of character and that his son's not capable of violence, this whole pattern of his behavior very much speaks differently to the individual that he is. So with that, of course, we know, again, it is the second attack on Trump, and we're just glad that this was not successful. We're glad that he is able to continue running in this election, and I implore all individuals that, regardless as to what political stance or what political side you are on, that once again, you go to the polls and have your voice heard. Do not take it upon yourself to act out in violence. And if you are feeling that you are able to reach out and get help, then you do that. If you do not feel comfortable reaching out to medical or other services, speak to someone you love, someone that you trust, someone that you care about, that cares about you, and bring them on board to help you with mental health issues. If you feel that you are in a position that you may act on a violent thought towards others or yourself, again, get help. There's no shame in that. But again, it is not only throwing away the life of the individual that you're trying to target, but also your own life, as you will either spend a lifetime on death row until the end of it, or you will spend a lifetime in prison. And again, that doesn't help anybody. It sure as heck doesn't help yourself or your family. So really, love yourself, love your family enough to know that when you are in trouble, you reach out for help and you don't take steps like this. So as I said, the individual that they have named at this point is Ryan Routh, and he is, again, just an individual that has some issues, obviously, from his record and from his posts on social media. So it's just another incidence of the very extreme side taking over, Angus. And we've seen it several times now, but we also see it in a lot of hatred and speech and vile attitudes of some people online. And this should have been a huge red flag. And as more information comes out, we'll find out if the FBI, the Secret Service, or anybody else had this individual on their radar.
Yeah, it's, Donald Trump, the president with 9 lives, really. It's shocking that yet again another assassination attempt in really just a matter of weeks. And it's concerning, really. And one has to sort of take a step back and say, well, look, Donald Trump is a very divisive figure. There's no doubt about it. But what I find intriguing is that his critics, particularly from the left side, from left of centre and the Democrats, the hatred of Donald Trump is visceral. It goes beyond politics. It's deeply personal, and I don't understand why. Excuse me. At the end of the day, the guy's a politician. He's got policies. If you don't disagree with his policies, then that's it. Argue against him. But what astounds me is that so many people on the left are motivated to take physical action. And ironically, they become the very people that they are accusing Trump of being. They are becoming violent and And just people like this just don't belong in civilized society. If you disagree with somebody, you don't go out and cause violence against them. You just argue against them, or represent your own views in a public domain. But as I say, I do find it interesting that, and this is reflected to some degree here in the UK. We have a very similar figure, Nigel Farage, who actually happens to be quite close to Donald Trump, who sits on the right wing, right of centre here in the UK. And he likewise is subject to a whole sequence of physical attacks. He has, recently, at the lower levels, he's had milkshakes thrown at him as he walks around in public. But recently, he had actually a whole block of masonry lobbed at him from on high that could have killed him from, again, a political critic. And again, why is it people on the left who immediately jump to violence to attack the politicians that they disagree with? And I have to say, on the right wing, I can't see any evidence of right wing people who supposedly are the evil, the devil incarnate, according to the left. It's not the right wing that are lobbing blocks of masonry at left wing politicians. It's not the right wing that are picking up rifles and shooting at their political opponents. It's the left wing, essentially, who are doing this. So, that's a pattern that I have seen emerge a lot recently, and I find that deeply concerning. And Donald Trump himself, thank heavens again, he's dodged another bullet. I did chuckle slightly at your turn of phrase there, James, when you said the Secret Service were one hole ahead. It conjures up quite interesting images of what the Secret Service are up to, obviously having a great round of golf themselves. But I think as you rightly pointed out, James, there's a whole issue of mental health services. Are they doing the jobs? But clearly this guy came from left field. This guy came from a background where, when you dig deep, there is some evidence of an agenda on his social media accounts, but nothing that would immediately point to the fact that he's going to pick up an AK-47 and start firing at Donald Trump. So the Secret Service, actually, you can't blame the Secret Service for this. And actually, you have to say well done for them for picking it up. I heard on the radio this morning that it was one agent just saw the rifle barrel poking out the bushes. Now, well done to him for spotting that. So they've done their job as opposed to failing miserably on that first attempt. So, James, it's shocking, I have to say. And unfortunately, it's becoming a little too frequent, and it's not good in any modern democracy. And those behind this, and as I say, I am very specifically pointing, and I see this on social media as well, the visceral hatred and the language used from the left wing is shocking, and I don't see it from the right wing. And yet it's the left wing always accusing the right wing of fascism. There's an old trope trotted out regularly. Oh, the fascist on the right wing. Well, I don't see the right wing using the sort of language, threats of violence. The threats that I see on social media coming from the left wing are unbelievable and literally verging on the criminal. And quite often it does cross that line into criminality. The incitement of violence and hatred. We've had a left-wing politician here recently, now on criminal charges, for demanding that people should be chopping the heads off right-wing people. That was a left-wing politician here in the UK. So again, it seems to be a slightly concerning thing emerging from the left wing. It's not unusual. It has happened in the past. But James, it's not a great story, really, is it?
No, it's not. And it just brings back the point of what the heck was somebody with such a violent record doing with an AK-47? Where did he get the weapons from? And these are questions that'll have to be answered in the investigation. And but at the end of the day, the Secret Service, the FBI, the local sheriff's department, they were very on top of it. They took immediate and very dedicated action to ensure that Trump was protected. Within seconds of the gunfire, there were Secret Service agents having Trump on the ground and covering him with their own bodies. That's dedication, and that is protecting democracy. They're not there to protect Donald Trump personally. When you look at that, they are there to protect an institution and a president, whether it's former president or not. They are there without regard for the individual. They are there to protect the sanctity of democracy and the person who held that job, whether you agree with Trump or not. He was a sitting president. He did a lot for the people. Whether it, was enough, that's up to individual voters to decide, and whether it was right or wrong, again, that's up to voters to decide, but not for anybody to decide to take his life, Angus. And with that, let's move on to our next story, which again, a political tie-in once more, except this time coming out of India. Now, I'm just going to pull up our screen here so that we can all follow along here. There we go. And the NIA raids close aides and relatives of Amritpal Singh. They raided homes and businesses, and they were looking to allegedly bring these people up on charges and capture them in relation to the attacks or the protests, I should say. What they call attacks, what I call protests in front of the embassy and the Houses of India in Canada, so the political arena, where they did turn around and have protests. They had, a lot of things going on there over the last several years. Now, the accusations also came out in some of the India press that there were grenades thrown over the walls at the High Council and the embassy in Ottawa. That's something that was the first I've heard of it in terms of the India news release, so I don't know how true that is. I will be reaching out to the Ottawa Police, the RCMP, to find out if there was actually any reports of grenades being thrown over the walls towards the embassy and the High Council. So we'll find out on that. But in the meantime, it just seems to be another incident of the government trying to put pressure on Mr. Amritpal Singh and his family, his friends, his supporters, and his aides. I mean, he's sitting in a prison cell after he clearly won an election, was voted in by the people to be their official representation in the political circle. And again, he still sits in a jail cell and being put off over and over. Angus, we've talked about this many a times, that, they still keep putting off his hearings, his trials, his information, because they don't have information. They don't have real charges of credibility that will stick within the courts, in my opinion. And that is, again, the opinion of many people, that they are using it, again, as a way to silence their opponents, to silence the other side, and, of course, to keep people from speaking out about the atrocities and the human rights crisis that's going on in India. The Modi government needs to step back and realize that in a democratic country, which they are claiming to be, they don't just lock up their opposition. They don't lock up people for speaking their minds, for having the ability or the capacity to actually have their own thoughts. And when they voice those thoughts, they should be, they should be rewarded. Whether or not you agree with them, whether or not they are against you, it is a learning opportunity for all of society to come together with differing points of view and to shape a nation for the future. And India wants to be a great financial power. They want to be a great democracy. They want to have influence over the way things are run around the world. And they're not going to achieve that goal if they don't stop locking up people for absolutely no reason, if they don't stop with the foreign interference, if they don't stop with all of the organized disappearances and, the brutality and the bullying of farmers. I mean, this has got to be a point that no matter who wins in the US election, no matter who wins in the next Canadian election, this is where international leaders need to come together and put more pressure on Modi to start respecting the human rights of his citizens, not just the select few who can afford to pay for it. And that, again, when you look at the people who were harassed by the NIA, there are just reported over and over of them doing this. And this is just another tactic of Modi, the raw agency, the NIA, to influence what's happening around their country, to keep people quiet and to push fear into not only citizens, but also the media and their opponents. So again, Angus, this is something that we've talked about over and over, and the time for Mr. Singh to get out of prison is now so that he can represent the people who wanted him there to do just that.
Yeah, this is it's a fascinating insight this into what actually is clearly going on. I think over the last year or more, and the more I've looked into the whole politics and structure of India and the Indian society, I've reached a very simple conclusion. And I had a fascinating podcast last week with Dr. Grinda Grewal, who gave a really detailed summary, if such a thing exists, but a very good summary of the politics of India and how the Brahmins effectively have taken control of India. Certainly since partition, they used partition as its mechanism to ensure that they could remain the ruling elite. The Brahmins brought in Hindutva, they brought in the RSS, and by extension the BJP. And from writing the constitution that served the ruling elite, it was written by the Brahmins to serve the Brahmins and ensure the Brahmins stayed in control. They have infiltrated the Indian government to ensure that they therefore control the governance of India. And that governance, again, is to ensure that the Brahmins remain in control of India forevermore. That is their clear stated modus operandi. That is the reason for them existing. Now, what is very clear amongst that and their tactics that they use is that any threat to their dominance of India, they will deal with ruthlessly. And as we've seen over the 1980s and 1990s, the biggest threat since partition has been the Sikh community. Because as we report regularly, and we know very well, the Sikh community is the only community, or at least the leading community, I would say, not the only community, but they are the leading community to have the courage to stand up to what is going on. They see the threat. They see the Brahmins for what they are. They know exactly what's happened in India. They made a mistake in 1947 to trust the Brahmins, and they've unfortunately learned a very painful lesson since that mistake. So since then, they have stood up as a threat to this Brahmanical rule of India. And the Brahmins know this, which is why this ongoing intimidation, harassment, and oppression continues, because they are scared. They're scared of the Sikhs and what they may do. And Amritpal Singh is just the latest incarnation of Sikh courage to stand up to this. And of course, they realise that Amritpal Singh, who has become a focal point, people in the Punjab, across the Punjab, are rallying around Amritpal Singh because he knows what's going on. He's seen it for what it is. And he, again, is the latest threat to Brahmanical rule. And they're terrified of him. So they are not afraid of using the state machinery. And that state machinery includes, obviously, the police, but it includes the National Investigation Agency, the NIA. It obviously includes RAW and every other state mechanism, the legal system, this joke legal system that has been deeply abused by the RSS and the BJP in bringing in these ridiculously undemocratic pieces of legislation. Like the National Security Act, the Unlawful Activities Prevention Act, etc., etc. These are mechanisms that they are using and abusing to ensure that threats against their Brahmanical rule cannot emerge and cannot become powerful enough to become a threat. That is why Amritpal Singh remains in prison. This is a very long tried and tested method to intimidate people like this, is to intimidate their families, their friends. This has happened to Khalistan activists overseas in the diaspora. Their friends and family back in the Punjab have regularly been raided by the police, by the NIA, threatened, detained for hours, if not days, with no legal justification, simply to intimidate them. Unfortunately, James, this is a sad fact of India. India is not a democracy. India is a fake, pretend democracy, as we've learnt. And this is no surprise whatsoever, I'm afraid.
Absolutely. And his brother-in-law was actually here in Canada. That's Amritpal Singh. And he was here in Canada when the raids took place, including of his home and business. So he was safe from the NIA. What would have happened to him had he have still been there, we don't know. But again, if he's watching our show or anybody that knows him, we'd love to have him on to discuss this topic and yeah, just to discuss the plight of his brother-in-law as well. So if you're out there, by all means, reach out.
Yeah, and I would suggest to our audience, if you haven't watched it already, watch the interview I did with Dr. Grewal last Friday. It was uploaded. Fascinating interview. Apologies for the sound. For some reason, there was not very good sound quality. But the interview was fascinating. A lot of detail, a lot of really powerful detail included, but a lot of supporting evidence to this whole issue of the original rule of the Brahmins and how they brought in Hindutva and the RSS, the key figures in that, and of course the BJP, the latest incarnation of all this. So, yeah. Right, which interestingly leads me on to my second story. Which is, sorry, my first story. I'm getting carried away with myself. My first story. So you blink and you missed it. Yeah, sorry. Apologies to the audience if I confuse you there slightly. So my first story. This was something that was released on the newswires just yesterday, which is a report of. Again, following the same theme. This is the abuse of state machinery by Narendra Modi's BJP. And of course, one of his top political opponents walked out of jail on Friday, ending months behind bars after being bailed in an ongoing corruption case against him, or an alleged corruption case. Yeah, this was Arvind Kejriwal, Chief Minister of the Delhi constituency, and a key leader, of course, in the opposition alliance that battled Modi in the elections earlier this year. And he was first detained in March. Now, he is among several opposition figures facing graft probes, and his party has described his latest arrest as a political conspiracy, orchestrated, of course, unsurprisingly, by the BJP. Now, Kejriwal walked free from jail in the capital just before the weekend, and he was greeted by hundreds of cheering supporters, and he waved happily to the crowd and shouted that they wanted to break me by jailing me, but he said his resolve is stronger than before. God is by my side. Now, a two-judge bench of the Supreme Court ruled earlier in the day that Kejriwal's arrest was lawful. Well, what a surprise. But that he should be released from custody while contesting the charges against him. They said that prolonged incarceration amounts to unjust deprivation of liberty. The Supreme Court Justice said, well, that's putting it mildly. He was bailed on a ₹1 million bond on the condition that he did not make public comment on the merits of the case against him, didn't visit his office, and refrained from signing official files. Basically anything that might actually pose a threat to Narendra Modi. The politician had earlier been freed by the same court for several weeks to allow him to actually campaign for this year's general election. Well, that was big of them, returning to custody once voting concluded. Now, his administration was originally accused of corruption when it implemented a policy to liberalise the sale of liquor in the capital 3 years ago, surrendering a lucrative government stake in the sector. The policy was withdrawn the following year, but the resulting probe into the alleged allocation of licences has since led to the jailing of two top Kejriwal allies. Now, rallies in support of Kejriwal, he's always denied this. He's always said these charges are nonsense, but rallies were held in numerous other big cities around India. The 56-year-old has been chief minister for nearly a decade and first came to office as a staunch anti-corruption crusader. So it does seem rather paradoxical that he would suddenly be charged with corruption offences. Bear in mind, it stands against everything that he is standing for publicly. And he had resisted multiple summons from the Enforcement Directorate, India's financial crimes agency, to be interrogated as part of the probe. Now, Modi's political opponents and indeed international rights groups have regularly been long sounding the alarm on India's shrinking democratic space. The Freedom House US think tank said this year that the BJP had, in their words, increasingly used government institutions to target political opponents. Yes, how often have we reported on this very abuse? Rahul Gandhi, of course, we talked about last week, and still a very much an ongoing situation there. He was convicted of criminal libel last year after a complaint by a member of Modi's party. So again, another politically motivated legal case against Rahul Gandhi. And his 2-year prison sentence saw him disqualified from Parliament, that basically they're trying to stop him from standing in the elections until the verdict was suspended by a higher court and raised concerns over democratic norms in India. And Kejriwal and Gandhi are both members of the opposition alliance. Yes, of course, both of them standing up against Modi. They are the key figures standing politically against Modi. Now, doesn't it seem suspicious? Now, it may well be. Maybe they are guilty of crimes we don't know. But it does seem rather, I would say, suspicious, James, does it not, that the two main political leaders standing against Narendra Modi, both of them, both imprisoned, both facing criminal charges, basically anything thrown at them to keep them out of the political arena. I think it says an awful lot about Indian politics, doesn't it?
It certainly does. And it's no secret that there is a lot of crime and corruption within the politic circle of India, as well as in the law enforcement and other agencies throughout the country. But it also, unfortunately, lends into Modi's narrative that he can sling those accusations, and a lot of times false accusations, towards the opponents and anybody speaking out to him, and lock them up indefinitely whenever he feels like it. And that's the sad part of the corruption that's happening, is that people tend to believe it more so than if it was in another country where democracy and accountability were involved. So.
Yeah, like I said, I mean, it's. I said earlier, it's just a pretend democracy of India. It's every day we trot out more and more pieces of evidence that really undermines Narendra Modi's credibility when he swans around the world saying, "I am the leader of the world's largest democracy." Unfortunately, Mr. Modi, you really need to get your house in order. It's it's very far from any democracy that we recognise. Talking of which, let me move on to my next story.
Accusations of convenience, right? It's accusations of convenience for Modi, because he just, whenever somebody's opposing him or making tailwinds, he just accuses them of things, and that's the way it is.
Exactly, and I'm just going to now move on to my next story, just a quick one. It's a quick update on Jaggi, yes, Jaggi Singh Johal, another absolutely prime example of India's failure as a democracy, India's failure to follow the normal democratic rule of law. We have Jaggi Singh Johal, who I'll try not to rant too much about, as I tend to get fairly aerated every time I raise the topic. He remains in jail for nearly 7 years, still awaiting any formal justice, still awaiting the conclusion of any trial. Well, the latest, we did report on Jaggi just the other day, and in that report I did promise that I would update you, because he was due in court at the end of August, because he had a hearing on the 17th of August. Midway through August, there was his 131st trial hearing. Yes, you heard that right. 131 trial hearings where witnesses, prosecution witnesses, failed to turn up, so they keep having to delay it. Yes, here we are, 7 years later. So on the 17th of August, his 131st trial hearing, he appeared by video link, and two senior police officers failed to attend and produce case property again. So it was delayed, postponed until the 31st of August. Well, the update I've got for the 31st of August, apparently the two senior police officers were cross-examined at this 132nd Bagapurana court trial hearing, where, of course, Jaggi appeared via video once again. No incriminating evidence was found against Jaggi during the examination. The prosecution have been given a final opportunity to call any further witnesses at the next hearing on the 10th of September 2024. And again, we'll give you an update on when we hear on that. Thereafter, evidence will be closed and final arguments will be heard to determine the case according to the presiding judge. So finally, 132 trial appearances later, are we nearing the end of at least just one of several trials against him? What a farce this is. And, the 9th of September, the 133rd trial hearing, Jaggi appeared again at Bagapurana Court in Punjab via video link, and only for the prosecution to fail to call any further witnesses or produce their evidence, and instead requested an adjournment. The next hearing will be on the 18th of September 2024. So that is in a couple of days' time. That's on Wednesday. So again, they are just delaying and delaying and delaying. It's one adjournment after another. And finally, actually back here in Scotland, Scotland's First Minister has actually finally spoken out. This is Swinney, who is the leader of the Scottish National Party. And he has met with Jaggi's brother Gurpreet Singh Johal, who himself is a lawyer and a Labour councillor. And of course, unsurprisingly, he's the leader of the Free Jaggi Now campaign, the hashtag Free Jaggi Now campaign. Scotland's First Minister, as the Scottish National Party leader, said publicly and on camera that Jaggi should be released immediately. So fortunately, he has waded in to the argument. He's lent his weight. Of course, he is not the Labour Party, the government. He is just the SNP, the leading party in Scotland at the moment. And of course, it was an SNP, one of his own MPs, who lost his seat, unfortunately, at the last election, who was Jaggi's own Member of Parliament, who was very vocal and very proactive in campaigning for Jaggi. Unfortunately, the Labour MP, currently now in Jaggi's constituency, has been remarkably silent about the whole affair. Again, to the shame of not just him, but to the Labour government. And again, I'm not trying not to get too aerated and ranting about that. But Keir Starmer, once again, we are looking at you and your appalling, shameful silence on this matter and inaction following the previous government's inaction, which you were very keen to criticise at the time, but what are you doing about it? Absolutely nothing. Show us some results, we will change our tune. As yet, we are still waiting for any action and your certain ongoing betrayal of the Sikh community here in the UK. So, James, unfortunately, it's same old with Jaggi. It's yet again adjournment after adjournment. This is India's process of so-called law at its finest, as I say in my most sarcastic tone of voice.
Absolutely. And I mean, the rule of law is, again, we covered this the other night, that justice delayed is justice denied. But this is not something that is hit home in India, because this is a very, very common practice in India to delay. And it's not uncommon to see over 100 trial appearances where nothing happens except more delays. So it's really, not a justice system that is working, and not a justice system that belongs in a country that, again, declares itself a democracy.
Yeah, I mean, the rule of law is a fundamental foundation pillar of democracy. And unfortunately, the rule of law is failing in India. And therefore, democracy is failing in India. I don't need even to say any more than that. So let us move on to my final story. This is a shocking story, actually. It's upsetting in many ways, particularly for the Sikh community. In Canada, in Brampton, Ontario, a hospital which actually, ironically, has benefited massively from the Sikh community, who've donated over $10 million in donations to this hospital. So it has received a huge amount of goodwill from the Sikh community. Unfortunately, has been involved in a terrible incident with an elderly Sikh patient. And it turns out the Sikh patient who needed medical care, his head and his facial hair was shaved unwillingly against the will of his family. Now, the World Sikh Organisation, WSO, has written to William Osler Health Systems and their CEO, Dr. Frank Martino, expressing their unsurprising shock and outrage over this deeply troubling incident at the Brampton Civic Hospital, where this elderly Sikh patient was shaved without permission. Now, the incident involved the gentleman was called Mr. Jaginder Singh Kalla, a practicing Sikh patient, happened last month, despite explicit instructions from his family to respect his religious beliefs and not shave him. Now, Mr. Kalla maintains the Sikh articles of faith, the 5Ks, which of course include maintaining uncut hair. Shaving or removal of hair is a violation of the beliefs of practicing Sikhs, of course, as we know. The hospital then contacted Mr. Kalla's family to seek permission to shave him. Mr. Kalla was at the time unconscious and unable to provide consent himself. The family very clearly refused that request, but despite that, on August 28th or 29th, Mr. Kalla was shaved in violation of his religious principles and against his family's wishes and personal dignity. Mr. Kalla had never shaved or cut his beard throughout his entire life. And as per the wishes of the family, the Sikh Press Association, who've highlighted this story, they contacted the family, and the family were happy for these pictures of Mr. Kalla to be released, I think just to highlight just the shocking nature of what actually happened. Now, the incident has unsurprisingly not only inflicted emotional distress on Mr. Kalla's family, but also has caused them profound trauma during what it was already a pretty challenging time because of his health situation. The attending physician attempted to shift blame to the nursing staff. However, the lack of a formal apology or satisfactory explanation from the hospital has actually just exacerbated the situation. And the WSO president, Danish Singh, said in a statement, "We are shocked and deeply saddened by the incident. Despite specific instructions by his family not to shave him, Mr. Callis still had his faith violated in such an egregious fashion. Given that Brampton is home to the largest Sikh population in Canada, it is inconceivable that such disregard for Sikh faith practices could occur at Brampton Civic Hospital." Now, unfortunately, there have been several incidents of insensitive treatment of Sikh patients or a lack of understanding of the Sikh faith at the same hospital over the past few years. Previously, training and cultural sensitivity training has been offered to the hospital and to similar healthcare providers to prevent these ridiculous occurrences happening. Unfortunately, these offers have not been adequately addressed. The Sikh community has always supported the hospital. However, it is clear the hospital has a lot of work to do to ensure members of the community receive the respect and dignity that they deserve. And the WSO does demand concrete action to ensure incidents like this don't happen again. The William Osler Health System must respond promptly and take action to prevent any future incidents of this nature. Ow, this is a bit of a pretty distressing situation for the Sikh community. Now, it's very clear. I think it's fair to say that there was no malicious intent here. And this comes back to James, our story about carrying the Kirpan and the taxi driver in New York who was arrested for carrying the Kirpan. It's the same principles here. It's all about education and awareness. And again, I don't think there was any malice intended here. It was just simply a lack of awareness, a lack of education. But it's actually slightly unforgivable by this hospital. This hospital serves the largest Sikh community in the area. So, of course, it's going to have a steady, I was going to say supply, that's the wrong word, a steady influx of Sikh patients from the Sikh community. And so there's got to be an inherent awareness within the staff. Surely, amongst the staff, there must be certainly senior medical officers in the hospital who will be aware of the particular elements, the particular sensitivities of the community, and of course the shaving of the hair. Because come on, how often does body hair have to be shaved for medical procedures on a regular basis? It happens daily. It's a pretty regular occurrence. So of course, as Sikhs come into the hospital, surely this cannot be the first time this question has been raised about the shaving, and specifically where the family said, "Do not shave this gentleman because of his Sikh faith." There has been a massive failure of communication. Clearly, there's been a massive failure between the staff and the senior staff shifting blame onto the nursing staff. Well, I'm sorry, but the buck stops with you. It stops with the managers. If the nursing staff, if that message didn't come down to the nursing staff, it is your fault, senior managers. You must carry the blame for this. It's a monumental cock-up. And I'm sorry this has happened. It's just a massive failure, and my heart goes out to the medical community. They do a fantastic job. Thank heavens for the medical community. They've got a dreadful... I've seen it myself recently with an elderly relative, how hard it is for them to look after elderly patients. It's a very thankless task. But please, these mistakes are really so avoidable. It's all about education. If you've got Sikhs coming into your hospital, you should be aware of something as obvious. Clearly it's obvious. You have a huge community, Sikh community in the region. James, so avoidable. Again, it's all about education, managerial failure.
Absolutely. And a couple of points there, Angus, is that from my understanding of following this story pretty closely is that the individual was transferred to another facility for the surgical procedure, after which time he was transferred back to the main hospital or care center. He was not shaved prior to the procedure. It was post-procedure. So if you have concerns about any type of recovery or infection and wound care, of course, that is a concern to shave the area. But that is a recommendation, not a requirement. And anybody that has known Sikhs throughout their life or the community understands how important that hair is to them. And under no circumstances should that sanctity be violated. That would be, a lot of people say, oh, well, it had to be done. Well, no, it didn't. It was recommended, not mandatory, for one. Number two, how many women go in for breast cancer treatment every year? And they may be a certain population or a certain percentage where it is recommended to have a mastectomy. But it is not mandatory. The patient doesn't go to sleep and wake up without their breasts because they have said no to that option. They are going to forego that option and try other treatments before making that decision. So it's not uncommon for people to refuse consent for certain areas, such as the removal of the beard, the mustache, and the hair. The family explicitly said no, and it was in the hospital documents. Had they read the chart, they should have seen it. I'm not saying they did. I'm saying they should have seen it in the patient's medical charts. So at that point, when it comes to a point where they went against the consent that was given, that actually becomes a criminal assault. And, whether or not the area in Brampton is going to follow through on that end of it or use it as a learning experience, one way or the other. I mean, they have definitely traumatized this individual and his family for absolutely no benefit whatsoever. And that really pisses me off.
Yeah, and another thing you touched on, quite an important element of this, is North America is a deeply litigious society. And therefore, particularly in the medical profession, the checks and balances are massive because of this very issue, because they are terrified of being sued. So every process, every procedure has countless checks and balances to ensure that everything is followed to the letter, that consent is given or withdrawn or whatever, that it is documented and it is followed through every single part of the chain. I mean, I had a medical procedure not long ago, and I had to go under anaesthetic, and at probably 5 different occasions, all the way through, even up to the operating theatre, I was asked a sequence of questions, literally seconds before I was unconscious, to check, do you agree, do you, all these questions, standard questions, but they ensured that a box was ticked so that they couldn't then be sued, so the mistakes basically weren't made. So I just find it astounding. And then, of course, there is the common sense element to this. If you're a nurse and you've got an elderly gentleman with a massive beard that's taken a lifetime to grow and groom, before you get the choppers out, you're going to ask a question. Hang on a second. Are you sure you want this beard removing? I mean, even common sense would make you hesitate and just double check. But anyway, James, we'll let's see. I'll leave it at that, and I'm sure our audience will have many comments on that one. So let us move on as time presses.
Our thoughts go out to the family and to the patient for a speedy recovery from such a horrific accident that he had. Just to go back a step. And the individual did fracture his head in several places, his jaw, and a broken arm. So he had quite the devastating fall. And that happens when you get older. Your bones become more brittle. And we just send our best thoughts to him to heal up well. And, I hope that he can move forward after this trauma.
Indeed, absolutely. And our best wishes to him and a speedy recovery. Okay, let us move on to our comments column. Now, I referred earlier to my podcast with Dr. Gurinder Singh, and Gurinder Singh Grewal, and it was a fascinating podcast. Do watch it. If you really want all the evidence of why the Brahmins are in charge, all about the Hindutva and this confusion between the Brahmanism and the Hindutva and the RSS and the BJP, watch that podcast. Lots of comments followed that. Of course, KS Sandhu said, thanks for bringing on this learned gentleman to enlighten your audience. It would be nice if you can write an editorial reflecting this conversation in major journals. This actually was a good comment. And in fact, Dr. Grewal himself contacted me after because the YouTube subtitling has done a pretty poor job, unfortunately, because the sound wasn't very good, so the subtitles are pretty poor. What I would tell you is that I'm now hopefully looking at a way of that. We've got a document that supports everything that Dr. Greywell said. It's a comprehensive document which he followed as a general guide, but it fills in lots of additional fascinating information as well. Loads of facts and figures, loads of supporting evidence, and I will upload that to a satellite location, and we will put the link on the podcast where you can download it. Hopefully today, if not today, tomorrow, where you can download this document, and you will have a full document of everything you need to know and everything that Dr. Greywell pointed to and gave instructions about. So keep an eye out for that. Jaggi 2450 said, now this is a curious comment. Is he a real doctor? His English is bad. This is why we're failing. Well, first, his English is bad. It's not that bad. Unfortunately, he's Punjabi. He's moved to the US. Apologies on his behalf, but he's doing his best. Language is not necessarily. We're not all gifted with perfect English. So please don't be too harsh on Dr. Greywell. He's done extraordinarily well considering. But the bit that concerned me most, is he a real doctor? Yes, he is a real doctor. And actually, let me just reread to you my introduction of Dr. Greywell, just to enlighten you. Dr. Greywell is not only a distinguished cardiology specialist in California with over 48 years of experience. Yes, he's been in the medical profession for over 48 years. He's a pretty qualified, highly experienced medical doctor. But not only that, he's the co-founder of the SikhHeritageEducation.com that documents and archives material relevant to Sikh rights and history. He was also the co-founder of the World Sikh News. That was a hard copy newspaper that ran for over 12 years before the digital revolution took over. So he has done an enormous amount for the Sikh community since at least the early 80s. 1984 was a catalytic event for Dr. Greywell. That's what made him so motivated to start documenting and evidencing the dreadful events throughout the 80s and 90s. He started a hard copy newspaper. That's not like today where anybody can start a blog. It actually requires a huge amount of effort, money, resources and time to start a printed newspaper that he circulated widely around the community. That, of course, was then superseded by the internet. But those are the efforts that Dr. Greywell went, not paid for it. This was off his own effort. So when I see a critical comment like this, please be aware that what he has contributed to the Sikh community is massive. It's a lot more than most people have done. So yes, he is a real doctor, and we're not failing. What he's contributed has ensured that the whole cause, the whole Sikh community has been massively advanced. So everything that he has done has been massively positive. So please, just be a little more restrained in your criticisms of Dr. Greywell. But thank you for the comment anyway. Right, back to the comments. Indian government owned by RSS Hindutva, and they born against the Sikhs. Yeah, this comes back, James, to what I've been talking about. The Brahmins, it's a fascinating story how they have actually gained control of the whole of India. Basically, since the British left, the British essentially, whether wittingly or unwittingly, handed control of India to the Brahmins. And of course, from that spun out the RSS, Hindutva, etc. So yeah, it's the ruling elite controlling India for the benefit of the ruling elite.
Absolutely, and that's clear too in the Constitution that was brought up that in several episodes that we've talked about being very one-sided to the top of the caste system.
And the final comment on Dr. Greywell's podcast from Hap B. Well done. Thank you for showing the mentality behind Indian politics. Well, yeah, it was revealing. The majority have never had the best intentions for minorities in India. No, they haven't. Absolutely haven't. As I keep saying, it's the ruling elite ruling for the benefit of the ruling elite. especially by dividing and destroying Punjab, and further dividing it, they're wiping out Punjabi in Punjab, so no one will be able to read the Holy Scriptures and any real Punjabi literature. This is why the community needs to fight back, as it is indeed. This is why the Khalistan movement is growing in strength. I'm very happy and pleased to report, despite what you may hear in the mainstream media, this fake narrative coming from those who are most threatened by it, the Brahmins, yes, of course, Hindutva, RSS, they're all basically, the serpent has many heads, but the main serpent body, well, that is the Brahmins. They are doing everything they can to try and destroy everything coming out of the Punjab, because they see the Punjab as its biggest threat. So, right, and let's get on to Rahul Gandhi, and lots of comments actually after our story, James, last week about the words from Rahul Gandhi's lips when he was speaking out in Washington DC. He really upset the RSS and Hindutva, and of course, well, going back to the Brahmins, he really upset them because he said the unsayable. He dared speak out in public about what was actually going on in India. Now, KP Singh said, Sikhs can't afford to believe this eyewash from Rahul, though what he said is true, but it needs to be taken with a pinch of salt. Yeah, this is interesting. As we referred to, James, it's tricky for Rahul Gandhi. He's speaking from a position of with a lot of baggage of 1984 and the years of the Gandhi dynasty and their oppression of the Sikh community. So, as we said last week, yeah, well done for speaking out, but of course he's open to criticism, and understandably those in the Sikh community are slightly suspicious of Rahul Gandhi. They don't trust him yet. It's going to take a lot more, isn't it?
Absolutely, and let's hope that time will show that his intentions are pure. But again, we'll have to wait and see.
Yeah, and then we talked about these fake Sikhs, and Dal Singh said definitely fake Sikhs under the RSS payroll. Yeah, these are these rent-a-mob Sikhs who've been rolled out to on behalf of the BJP and by extension, of course, on behalf of the RSS, defending the RSS agenda for some bizarre reason. And you're referring to this particular one, like this restaurant owner here in the UK who's joined with Tommy Robinson, our right-wing political activist, always saying incorrect things about Khalistan. Well, yeah, is he a fake Sikh? He could well be. And Tommy Robinson is a very, again, a bit like Nigel Farage and others on the right wing, very divisive. But he's been calling out a lot of the deep state issues here in the UK. And of course, he's become an enemy of the deep state. And very much like in India, the deep state of India rolling out their machine to shoot down Rahul Gandhi, anybody daring to criticise, Tommy Robinson has actually stood up and dared to criticise the British deep state, the British establishment. And look what's happened to him. Now, of course, the Indian right wing have jumped on board with this, thinking, oh, great, Tommy Robinson's one of our own. But of course, conditional upon Tommy Robinson getting all this airtime, this powerful Indian media airtime, they've said to him, but you must criticise the Khalistan movement. So unfortunately, Tommy Robinson has been, without realising, I don't think Tommy Robinson is very politically astute about Indian affairs. He, of course, has said, yeah, no worries, I'll criticise the Khalistan movement because he doesn't really understand what it's all about. I suspect if he did know what it was all about, he would change his tune. An education thing there, maybe. Maybe we need to educate Tommy Robinson about what the Khalistan movement's about. That would be interesting. So, yeah, fake Sikhs, that's a big topic. And 1S1NT says, now this refers to Simrat Badal, this leader of the Shiromani, sorry, she's not a leader, she is an MP for the Shiromani Akali Dal. She spoke out quite vocally on Twitter, on X, about Rahul Gandhi, and it was quite overtly saying, look, Rahul Gandhi, you've no right to say these things. You and your dynasty were responsible for 1984 and Operation Blue Star. So she was brutal. But this person says, Simrat Badal says, she's a blatant opportunist and will say anything to make political points. Her family has not only promoted and protected the most prominent leaders that have personally killed innocent Sikhs, but have been instrumental in the murder of thousands of Sikhs in Punjab. They have a long history of betrayal. Wow, I didn't know this. So yeah, this is, a political opportunist. How many of those do we know, James? Who, has principles, but hell, if they don't work for you, I have other principles.
We would like to.
Yeah. And Amrit comes in with a final comment. Indian government install fake Sikhs in Sikh institutions. Yes, absolutely. This is a well-known tactic of the RSS BJP. It's they know how to divide the Punjabi community, how to divide the Sikh community. They've parachuted in their own fake Sikhs, their own puppets, into these key institutions, these key Sikh organisations, to deliberately divide, weaken and dilute them. This is why Amritpal Singh, for example, has become so popular, because he has become a more uniting figure, whereas these other organisations have deliberately been divisive to try and split up and break apart and fragment the Sikh community to weaken it. People like Amritpal Singh have come along and they've done quite the opposite. They're uniting it. This is why the Brahmins are so afraid of Amritpal Singh and people like him, is because their tactic of dividing is failing with Amritpal Singh. He stands as a genuine threat. He is uniting the Punjabi and the Sikh community around him. That's what they're scared of. That's what they're terrified of. United we stand, divided we fall. Remember that. And final set of comments. Hap B says again, sins of the father are not those of the son. Yes, James, we're talking about Rahul Gandhi and his family and their dreadful baggage. But this is not what they believe in India. This is a good point. India attacks and tortures all relatives, just as you said, James, about Amritpal Singh. They target their aunties, their uncles, their mothers, their fathers, their brothers. And today, brother-in-law has been attacked and houses searched, trying to find anything to connect Amritpal Singh. Absolutely, James. As you rightly point out, this is a sinister police state tactic of Narendra Modi, is it not?
Oh, very clearly.
And I think Hap B has really got the measure of Narendra Modi. Yeah, we know we know how it works. As he says, this is India. And Kuljit Mangat says, may you remember when Sikhs asked human rights and self-determination back in Punjab, this is going back in time, their slogan was, well, go to Canada, USA or somewhere else. Yeah, basically in the past, I think when people said, when Sikhs particularly said, we want human rights and self-determination back in Punjab, their slogan was, well, we're not going to find it in India. We have to go to places like the Canada, the USA or other Western democracies. And I think that says it all.
Absolutely. And if I might just interject one thing there, Angus, is that a lot of people ask, if it was so great in India, why did you come to Canada? Why did you come to the US? Why did you come to the UK? And why are you here fighting instead of back in India fighting? And the very simple answer to the people who are ignorant of the actual reality is that if they were speaking out in India, they would be locked up in prison, or they would be disappeared, or other very tragic things could happen to them and their families. So of course they're going to come to the safety and sanctity where they can still fight for what's right and have the protections that they should have in their own country, but they instead have to come here for. So absolutely, they come here to be able to move towards a future where their families can have their own nation and their own safety and their own human rights respected. So I hope that clarifies a very important point for some.
Yeah, good point. And how often do we see critical comments, quite often on our comments sections, where the right wing or Hindutva activists always say, well, if you want Khalistan, have it in Canada or USA. Well, the reason that they're campaigning in Canada and the USA is because if they do that in the Punjab, as you rightly point out, James, is that they'll go to jail like Amritpal Singh. They're too afraid. Khalistan should be, obviously, where Khalistan geographically should be located, in the Punjab. But they daren't campaign in the Punjab because they'll end up in prison. That's why democracy is failing in India. That's why the Hindutva, you don't seem to get this whole point. That's why they are forced to flee abroad to campaign, because they're too afraid to do it in their own country, their so-called democratic country, which clearly therefore is not democratic. It's not very hard to work out. Now, SSI Singh comes up with quite a good comment here. And this actually is after my slightly tongue-in-cheek comment last show, where I said, well, they'll be arresting Rahul Gandhi next under anti-terrorism laws. Well, yeah, you rightly point out. Will Rahul be charged under the Unlawful Activities Prevention Act, this awful piece of undemocratic legislation which they've managed to imprison Amritpal Singh under, or sedition law? And is he going back? Will he be arrested in jail? Of course not, all in it together. Nice show. Well, thank you for that comment. It will be interesting to see what happens to Rahul Gandhi when he gets back to India. I don't think Narendra Modi would have the courage quite to do him under the UAPA or the NSA. He's certainly having a go under the anti-corruption, the anti-graft laws, as were reported on earlier in the show. Now, Knockdown says Rahul Gandhi is a
couple of comments by politicians in India making that accusation as well, saying that he's a traitor and should be arrested. So it'll be interesting to see how it plays out, Angus.
Yeah, absolutely. But this next comment is interesting, and I didn't know this. Rahul Gandhi is a practicing Brahmin, as he claimed himself. I didn't know that. Which basically means, well, he's protected then if he is. And we know what happens next. No one trusts one word that comes out of his mouth. So here we are again. I think the Sikh community are very unsurprisingly and justifiably deeply suspicious of Rahul Gandhi. Wonderful that he made the statement that he made, but it's going to take an awful lot more than that, Mr. Gandhi, to win the hearts of the Sikh community. I think an apology for Operation Blue Star would be at least a good start to that. So you know where to start, Mr. Gandhi, if you're watching our show. It just takes a simple apology, and that will be one big step towards winning our audience's hearts just a little bit further. So it's a long road to recovery. It is a long road to forgiveness, but it's not impossible. And the final comment of the show from Reckless says, thanks Angus brother, love from Khalistan. Well, one day, James, as we said, we hope that Khalistan will be a geographical and sovereign reality. We are doing our best. We feel it is deeply justified. The movement is growing. I have no doubt within the Punjab the movement is growing as well. The Brahmins, the RSS, the BJP know that fact. That's why they are running scared. That's why they are ramping up the tension. That's why they are ramping up the legal legal javelins that they're throwing at the opposition. They're keeping Amritpal Singh in prison for a very good reason, James. They're running scared. They know the Khalistan movement is growing with momentum. It is happening. It's going to happen.
Absolutely. And don't forget over there in Khalistan that when I arrive, I like my food spicy.
We like our beer cold and our food spicy. Oh, but I don't think we can drink as Sikhs, so maybe not. maybe we like our water ice cold. So, but anyway, on that slightly cultural insensitive note, we must wrap things up for Perspectives. Please don't forget to keep those comments coming in. We do enjoy reading them, and it gives us loads to talk about at the end. So do keep those coming in. And you can, of course, message us directly at message@satellotv.com if there's anything you'd like to let us know that you don't want to put in the public domain. But in the meantime, thank you very much for watching Perspectives. It is a goodbye from me, and it's a goodbye from James.
Bye, everyone. Stay safe.
You have been watching Perspectives. We will see you next time.